EMFs, or electromagnetic fields, are the primary communication system of nature, of life. Life is possible because of the electromagnetic rays of the sun, the earth, and the cosmic background radiation coming together on our planet, filtered through the atmosphere, the Van Allen belts, and the ionosphere to such perfect quantities and frequencies and a spectrum of frequencies that biological life is possible. If the sun wouldn't go up tomorrow morning, all life, with the exception of a few deep soil bacteria, would vanish in 17 hours. This shows how dependent we are on natural electromagnetic fields. Our bodies are bioelectrical direct current batteries. Every metabolic process is an exchange, a transfer of electrons. We wake up in the morning because sunlight activates the dopamine system, which makes us alert and stimulates us to activity, to seek things that we do not yet possess. So originally this was obviously a mechanism that would awaken us to find food and shelter and take care of life's necessities. And of course today we channel this kind of energy from the dopamine system into other activities, but it all depends on sunlight and changes in the Earth magnetic field. We can speak and breathe and have a body temperature and move because in our mitochondria, the little power plants inside the cell, electrons are accelerated, and this acceleration of electrons releases energy, infrared to be precise, which is then stored in chemical form. And this is interesting because when you read about energy metabolism in biochemistry and medical textbooks, you always find the references to the chemical aspect, ATP, which is the molecule that stores energy for us, in which when decomposed into ADP and phosphate, releases energy. But where does the energy come from? It comes from an electromagnetic field that our mitochondria produce by accelerating electrons. So electromagnetic fields are the fundamental principle of life. Biological life isn't even conceivable without electromagnetic fields organizing the body, giving it energy, and making a biological organism a link between sunlight, the Earth magnetic field, and other energetic influences. And it is in this environment, with these natural electromagnetic factors or natural electromagnetic fields, that our bodies developed over millions of years. So, of course, we are designed for the influence of sunlight, the Earth magnetic field, the influences from the ionosphere, from the atmosphere, the very healthy after effects of thunderstorms and rainfall, and the electromagnetic fields produced by healthy plants. In the last 200 years, technical electricity has appeared. And of course, 200 years is an extremely short span of time, considering life's evolution and the evolution of human bodies. Technical EMFs are fundamentally different from natural EMFs in two ways. First of all, there's obviously a huge difference in quantity or intensity. Our skin has free electrons. Our skin has a voltage, 1 millivolt is typical. Acupuncture points have 5 millivolts. This is why they can be located. This is why they are distinct from other points on the skin. An acupuncture meridian is a pathway of decreased resistance, electrical resistance that is, and therefore increased conductivity. Now 1 millivolt is a very low intensity. Life is very efficient in organizing itself. Life never produces waste. It doesn't produce unnecessary friction. And so natural organisms need very little energy compared to technology to function. Living organisms need natural electricity, but they need low voltages, low intensity compared to technology. Just consider 110 or 220 volt, depending on where you live, household electricity, which is not particularly strong for technology, of course. They're much stronger forms of technical electricity, but you couldn't even touch an outlet without getting fried, maybe even killed. So the sheer intensity of technical electricity is something that our bodies are not designed for. We can compare this to natural radioactivity. Radioactivity does occur. We have radioactive noble gases in the atmosphere, and we have some uranium and some other radioactive elements in the Earth crust, most of which is underneath the Earth at a distance from us that it doesn't influence us at all, but there's a little bit of uranium on the surface of the Earth as well. So radioactivity is present, but radioactivity from a nuclear power plant, of course, is a whole different ballgame, and we have to do everything we can to keep it inside. And even if it's kept inside, and even if it's we believe we are well protected from it, there are leakages and there are other secondary problems. So technical radioactivity can create problems that natural radioactivity never could. Hiroshima could not have happened with natural radioactivity. Similarly, we need natural electricity and we need natural electromagnetic fields to live and to thrive and to be healthy. But the sheer intensity of technical EMFs is just so over the top for any living organism, not just for us, but for plants as well, for any animal. That's one significant difference. Another significant difference between natural and technical EMFs is that all natural electricity is what we would now call direct current. Direct current was the only current existing before Nikola Tesla invented the alternating current generator in 1888. Direct current means we have two poles in a cell between nucleus and cell membrane, or we have different types of polarity, electrical polarity in the body between the feet and the roof of the skull, for example, the roof of the skull being the positive pole and the feet being the negative pole, and between different points on meridians and so on. And these poles never change, as they never change in any natural organism. So a tree, for example, has a negative pole at its root, drawing electrons upward to the crown, which is the positive pole. And it's the positive pole so that rain is attracted, because raindrops are negative in charge. And this is why deforestation leads to droughts, because if there are no trees, rain is not attracted to fall down. Thankfully, the poles, the electrical poles in a tree never switch. They never change. It would create complete chaos. Life wouldn't work. Our lives wouldn't work if the electrical poles in trees could change, if our poles could change. Cellular life depends on a network of electrical exchanges that depend on the cell membrane having a certain charge and the nucleus having a certain charge and the fluid in between having a certain charge and mediating between these two. So direct current, stable poles, is the only electricity in life. Now alternating current switches poles 50 times per second, which is a very, very rapid speed, considering that everything that lives on Earth has stable electrical poles throughout life, compared to which 50 pole changes per second are incredibly fast. If an electromagnetic field is produced as a byproduct, or it's produced intentionally by an electrical source operating on alternating current, the electromagnetic field carries the characteristic of alternating current. And if an electromagnetic field with an alternating current characteristic meets a biological organism, which is all direct current, if the technical EMF is strong enough, it will create an immense irritation in the system. Our systems are designed to receive EMFs from the sun and the atmosphere and the earth and plants and even from the food we eat that are all characterized by direct current. If something hits us that is characterized by alternating current, our system has no design for that. It has no design to process alternating currents. It just can't do it. So on a cellular level, the stability of the two electrical poles between cell membrane and nucleus is compromised. Not to the degree that the poles actually change. At least that has not been measured so far. But the degree of irritation is such that if a technical EMF is strong enough, the ion channels, particularly the voltage-gated ion channels, as you can deduct from the term, voltage-gated means, well, it's protected by a certain cellular voltage, which is in a healthy cell typically 70 millivolt. These ion channels open randomly. And in this random opening, an influx of all kinds of substances into the cell can happen, but particularly problematic is the influx of calcium ions. Now, you may not think of anything harmful when you hear calcium because it is an essential nutrient. However, we should understand that even with the most essential nutrients, it matters where in the body they are. Just think of water. You want to drink it. You do not want to have it in your lungs. In your lungs, it can kill you if you drink it. It is a different story. So for calcium, the rule is keep it outside the cell and incorporate it into structures like osteocalcium, which is the protein that is forming our bones and such. But you do not want a high concentration of calcium ions in the cells. However, that's exactly what happens if your smartphone is close to your body, wireless LAN router, any strong EMF will have this effect, that this opening of the ion channels creates an influx of calcium ions into the cell, which then in turn leads to a free radical cascade reaction, at the end of which you find the two most destructive free radicals that the human body can produce, peroxynitrate and superoxide. These two are the two free radicals that are often referred to when there's talk about free radical damage, the need for antioxidants, premature aging, all these correlations, and then all these risks that go hand in hand with an overload of free radicals. It's basically these two molecules that are the culprit there. And interestingly enough, these two free radicals are the real harm that is produced in the body by radioactivity. So we may think of radioactivity as dangerous because we may have pictures in our minds of deadly dosages, the unfortunate victims of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, or the heroic workers in Chernobyl who went inside the reactor and all died of cancer in short order. Now, of course, there are deadly dosages which just destroy the DNA. We have the same, by the way, with other non-radioactive types of electromagnetic fields. So if you think that radioactivity is deadly and then anything below radioactivity in the frequency range is not, just think of a microwave oven, because your microwave oven operates at 2.5 gigahertz, and that's the same frequency as 4G mobile phone communication. It's just a matter of intensity. So if human body would be placed inside a microwave oven, no chance of surviving that. Same is true for gamma rays. Gamma rays are deadly only in these extreme concentrations. So we have the same difference between deadly exposure and exposure you can survive and live to tell about it, which, however, undermines long-term health. And when it comes to these low-level exposures, low-level meaning you may not have immediate symptoms, you do not have an instant risk of dying from it unless you're already in a compromised health situation. When it comes to low-level exposure, the damage done to the body is exactly the same, whether it's your cell phone or X-rays, whether it's computer, wireless LAN, communication from satellites, anything, and the radioactivity released by nuclear power plants or what you're exposed to in other types of radioactive applications in medicine, radiation therapy, for example, or being exposed to radiation because of other technical devices. In 2013, this equal effect on our cellular integrity was documented and proven. And so we can no longer speak of a difference that you find in all the old textbooks, the difference between ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. Ionizing means anything from X-rays upward in this frequency spectrum. When it comes to EMFs, we have a spectrum that starts at extremely little frequencies. Those are frequencies we usually find in the earth and naturally, and then there are technical sources like underground electrical wires, for example. And it goes all the way up to gamma rays, which is the highest electromagnetic frequencies. And then there is this distinction starting from X-rays upward, where this part of the spectrum is called ionizing radiation. And the reason is that in a lab experiment, if you have a solution with molecules and you expose them to X-rays, you expose them to gamma rays, free radicals are formed, electrons are ripped apart from molecules because this high frequency radiation has enough energy to do so. Now, if you place your cell phone near a test tube with a solution of molecules, it's unlikely that you produce free radicals unless the exposure is long enough. But there's definitely a difference in energetic intensity in these lower, previously called non-ionizing forms of radiation. However, you and I, we're not test tubes with a solution, we have cells. And for an organism with cells, there's no difference. So whether you expose a human body to X-rays or you expose it to cell phone radiation, there's no difference. You have the same two free radicals, the only difference being that ionizing radiation produces them directly, the wave hits the cell and molecules disintegrate, their electrons are ripped away from them and you have free radicals and they end up in superoxide and peroxynitrate. With non-ionizing radiation, cell phones and so on, you just have one step in between which takes about 5 seconds. So 5 seconds later, when you have exposure to a technical EMF, you have the same damage that you would have if it was X-rays, gamma rays, anything in the radioactive spectrum. Now, where does this lead to, health-wise? The question should rather be, which problem cannot be aggravated by this? Because a human body would die from these free radicals if it didn't compensate around the clock by mobilizing its most powerful intracellular antioxidants. During the day, this is NAD. We could say NAD is the royal enzyme in a human cell. We need it for our mitochondria, for energy production. We need it to activate those enzymes that repair DNA, PARP enzymes, P-A-R-A-P, they are called. We need NAD to activate certain proteins which repair cell membranes. Certain proteins have gained some recognition in previous years. Since 2016, Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded for the documentation on how important intermittent fasting is for our health. Now, why is intermittent fasting important? Well, there are a few factors the main one is certain proteins are produced only after around 12 hours without food. Only then does this process start, so that it's wise to not eat for 15, 16, 17 hours in a 24-hour cycle, so that you have a few hours of enhanced sirtuin production. Now, sirtuins are great if they're activated by NAD. If not, they cannot properly function. During the night, our most potent intracellular antioxidant is melatonin. Melatonin is often called the sleep molecule. It's a lot more than that, actually. Melatonin during deep dreamless sleep is transformed into a molecule that regenerates our bones, connective tissues, and muscles. During the dream phases, part of melatonin, if we have sufficient amounts, is transformed into DMT, called the molecule of the soul by John Lilly, a very important molecule for psychological hygiene, we might say, and neuroplasticity, for learning and for integrating experiences, for just basic psychological maintenance, and hopefully, becoming a little wiser over the years. We need melatonin for that. And melatonin is a super powerful antioxidant, and it should be used as an antioxidant during the night for a specific purpose, because in the first phase of sleep, our immune system purposefully produces certain radicals, nitric oxide, for example, which is a great scavenger to destroy bacteria, viruses, parasites that have no business being in our body. So if you ever had the experience that you felt you were getting sick, maybe you get a flu, and you have a good night of sleep and you wake up healthy, that's the work of these nitric oxide radicals, which then are neutralized by melatonin so that they don't produce any damage to the body. This is where melatonin as an antioxidant should be used during the night. And sufficient melatonin then in the morning is converted into pinealine, and pinealine is a mood enhancer. And pinealine, sufficient pinealine, allows you to wake up in the morning and feel great about a new day and be motivated. And if people wake up and they're not motivated and they feel dreadful, well, then they most likely are lacking pinealine. All of this is possible only if there is sufficient melatonin. Now, if we're exposed to EMFs and during the day we're wasting our precious NAD, and during the night we're wasting precious melatonin, then we will not have sufficient energy during the day. And we will not have good cellular repair during intermittent fasting. And we will not have healthy mitochondria. And we will not be able to sufficiently repair DNA damage. And during the night, we will not have sufficient melatonin to be transformed into arginine vasotosin, which is the molecule that repairs our connective tissue and bones and muscles. And we will not have sufficient melatonin to be transformed into DMT, and we will not have sufficient melatonin to be transformed into pinealine in the morning. So even if we forget the risk of chronic disease and cancer and all these, dreadful diseases that hopefully we'll never get, just the basic quality of life, to have great energy during the day and to truly recover during the night. This alone is severely hindered by technical EMFs. And we get an interesting hint from medical history about this connection. Because if you look into medical history textbooks, if you look into what scholars and doctors recorded over the centuries, it is interesting that in previous times, in previous eras, you find all kinds of diseases, some of which we also find today. Of course, we find much more infectious diseases, particularly a higher mortality, and we find starvation in Europe and in what's now called the First World. But what we never find in any documentation from antiquity until the mid-19th century is this combination of symptoms like sleep deprivation despite lying in bed long hours, lack of restful sleep, being emotionally hyper fragile, irritable, lack of concentration, short attention span, and just this overall feeling of exhaustion for no apparent reason, not exhaustion from a 16-hour shift in a factory in the Industrial Revolution, and that's to be expected. But if people had a balanced life or even a leisure lifestyle, there was never a documentation about symptoms that nowadays we call burnout or chronic fatigue. This begins in 1869 when George Miller Beard, a neurologist from New York, defined a new disease, and he defined it because he didn't learn about it in medical school because it simply didn't exist previously. But then when he opened his practice in 1860, he had so many patients with these symptoms and he didn't find any literature on it. So in 1869, he defined neurasthenia, nerve weakness. If you look at the list of symptoms, it's exactly what we call burnout today. Now, at that time, in the 1870s, neurasthenia was also called telegraphy disease because people who worked in telegraphy stations almost always had this disease. And it almost always commenced when they started working in this environment. And people in telegraphy stations were the first group of people exposed to high amounts of technical EMFs throughout the day. This was new. Telegraphy was originally invented in 1839, then in the 1850s. It became very popular, particularly in the United States, in the North. Many historians believe that the reason why the North won the Civil War is because Abraham Lincoln believed in technical progress, and so he used telegraphy to coordinate his troops, which the South didn't do. And so by the 1860s, due to this booming industry and all kinds of telegraphy stations popping up everywhere, more and more people were working there, and now this new disease was described. And if we look into medical literature from the 1870s, 1880s until the early 1890s, this was openly discussed in medical schools throughout the United States. Telegraphy disease, the fact that more than 80% of people working in telegraphy stations had this list of symptoms either chronically or periodically. And then in 1895, Sigmund Freud came along and claimed that neurasthenia was exclusively caused by neurosis from suppressed sexual feelings. Well, much respect to Dr. Freud for a lot of pioneering work, but I respectfully disagree with him there. So the baseline quality of life, how alive you can feel, how fully present you can be for the things you want to do, is compromised by technical EMFs. There's absolutely no doubt about it. There are many, many correlations also to severe chronic diseases, but the factor of fundamental aliveness, of being mentally alert, of being emotionally poised, of being able to regenerate from taxing endeavors, from intense investment of your energy into your projects in life, into exercise, into whatever it is you want to do. This situation we have today, and those of us who work in the holistic health field know this so well, how there are so many people who live with the brakes on, who never seem to have more than a few days at best where they feel fully alive. Physical life by itself in day-to-day life has become a problem for many people simply because of the way they fundamentally feel. And since this has creeped into our civilization slowly, and since the advent of technical electricity and then more and more electrification of our environment has been accompanied by a lot of positive changes as well. And we have improved a lot of living conditions. We have improved hygiene. We do not die from cholera or other diseases anymore that were caused by lack of sewage systems and so on. It has become somewhat invisible. So what we need to do today is take an honest, sobering look at the scientific documentation, and the scientific documentation not influenced by any lobbies, by any economic interests. And what we see is that technical electromagnetic fields are definitely one of the greatest health hazards on Earth. And to just give you an idea how immense the change in our environment for us as biological, bioelectrical organisms is, between 1920 and 2020, in 100 years, just guess how much technical EMFs have increased in quantity. How much more technical EMF exposure do we have today compared to 100 years ago? Now make a mental note of what you would guess. And the answer is 1 trillion times. That's a number with 18 zeros. Unless you're a mathematician or an astrophysicist, you probably do not come across this number very often. There's no factor in life where an increase of 1 trillion times is conceivable without severe effects on biological life. We couldn't listen to a sound 1 trillion times louder than natural sounds. We would die on the spot. We have a small range of parameters in our blood, the nutrients we need, the oxygen content in the air, and the same is true for electromagnetic fields. Biological life is well organized because in biological life, the fragility of an individual organism is taken care of by the balance of how all organisms together form a synergy that works. So we depend on oxygen. We have to have the right amount, not too much, but also not too little. Well, in synergy with green plants, this works. But it's a small range in which life is operational. And the same is true for EMFs. And just because we have the technical means to induce significant changes in our electromagnetic environment, it doesn't mean that this is a wise choice. It doesn't mean that it's not going to affect biological life, our health, our well-being on all levels.